They crossed her fence laughing, boots crunching on gravel that had not heard careless footsteps in years. The sound drifted up the mountain like a bad joke told too loudly, the kind that assumes no one is listening. She heard it anyway. She always did. Wind carried laughter differently at this altitude, bending it, stretching it, turning it into something thin and sharp. The woman stood inside her cabin, a mug cooling in her hands, eyes unfocused as her mind shifted from quiet to calculation. She had built this place for silence. She had chosen the slope, the tree line, the angles of stone and shadow, not for beauty but for control. The fence was not meant to stop anyone. It was meant to announce them. The men didn't know her name. They knew the mountain belonged to a woman who lived alone, and that was enough for their amusement. They joked about hunting, about trespassing, about how nobody would notice if they cut across private land. One of them shook the fence, testing it, as if daring the mountain to answer. It did, in its own way. She set the mug down without a sound and pulled on a jacket that smelled faintly of pine oil and gunmetal. The old habits came back with the ease of breathing. Check the weather, check the wind, check the light. The sun was low, throwing long shadows downhill, perfect for hiding movement and terrible for men who thought laughter made them invisible. She stepped outside and closed the door softly behind her. The cabin blended into the rock like it had grown there. She had built it with her own hands after the service, every board measured twice, every nail placed with intention. People thought she came up here to heal. They were wrong. She came here to remember without interruption. She moved uphill, not toward the fence but away from it, slipping between trees that knew her weight and did not complain. Her rifle waited higher up, cached beneath stone and bark where it had slept through seasons. She uncovered it and ran her hand along the barrel like greeting an old friend. The scope was clean, the action smooth. She settled into the ground and let the mountain swallow her outline. Down below, the men crossed through the fence and fanned out, still laughing, still careless. One pointed at the cabin and made a crude comment. Another kicked a rock downhill and watched it bounce, delighted by the noise. They talked about shortcuts and beers and how nobody owned a mountain. None of them looked up. None of them noticed the way the birds had gone quiet. She watched them through glass that narrowed the world to breathing, to pulse, to the simple math of distance and time. She did not feel anger. Anger was loud. She felt responsibility. This was her land. This was her mountain. They had chosen to enter it without respect. She let them walk deeper. That was important. The first rule she had learned long ago was patience. A trap sprung too early teaches nothing. The mountain was a one-way place if you knew how to make it so. Trails that looked like paths led into dead ends. Clearings that seemed safe funneled sound uphill. Loose shale slid under weight, announcing steps long before they reached her. She shifted position as the wind shifted, adjusting by inches that mattered. The men split into pairs. One pair headed toward a ravine. The other angled toward the cabin, curiosity replacing humor. She took out a whistle, carved from bone, and let a single note cut the air. It echoed, bounced, returned in distorted fragments. The men froze. They laughed again, a little thinner this time, and called out jokes to each other. She waited, then let another sound roll downhill, a crack like a branch snapping under weight. They moved toward it, predictably. Humans always moved toward noise. She tracked them, marking angles, imagining lines drawn through trees and rock. She had taught recruits once, standing in front of whiteboards, explaining how terrain thinks if you listen to it. The mountain thought in switchbacks and blind spots. She listened. The first shot did not come from the rifle. It came from a trip line that snapped tight and sent a weighted log swinging across a narrow path. One man went down hard, breath punched out of him, laughter replaced by panic. His partner swore and bent to help, and that was when the mountain took another step. Rocks loosened above them and slid, not enough to crush, just enough to trap a leg and teach fear. The sound carried. The other pair heard it and ran uphill, straight into the wrong line of sight. She breathed out and fired once, a round that shattered stone inches from a boot. It was a warning shot, precise enough to be unmistakable. They stopped. Silence fell heavy and complete. Her voice followed, calm and steady, carried by the slope. She told them to sit. She told them to drop anything metal. She told them to listen carefully. There was no threat in her tone, and that was what frightened them most. One of the men shouted back, bravado cracking, asking who she thought she was. She answered with instructions instead of names. She had learned that authority did not need explanation. It needed consistency. She guided them into positions where they could see each other and nothing else, where movement felt exposed and stillness felt like safety. The mountain held them there like a patient teacher. Time stretched. The sun slid lower. Cold crept in. She stayed hidden, shifting as needed, never revealing herself. She spoke when they moved wrong, when fear made them reckless. She corrected them with the same tone she had used on firing lines and in classrooms, the voice that assumed compliance and usually got it. The man with the trapped leg whimpered. She told him how to breathe. She told him how to keep the blood moving. She told him help would come if they did exactly as she said. They asked if she was going to kill them. She did not answer directly. She told them why fences existed, why laughter carried, why mountains remembered footsteps. She told them that ownership was not always written on paper. Sometimes it was written in lines of sight and patterns of wind. She told them she had left the world once because it had become too loud, too full of people who did not listen. She told them she would call for help when the light faded enough to make the descent dangerous, not before. They sat and shivered and learned. When the rescue team arrived hours later, guided by coordinates she sent from a secure device, they found 4 men alive, shaken, and obedient. They found no shooter, no ambush, only a mountain that seemed to watch them leave. The report would say trespassers detained by landowner, no shots fired at persons, no serious injuries. It would not mention the way their laughter had died. It would not mention how the mountain had felt like a hallway with doors that closed behind them. She returned to her cabin after the sound of engines faded. She cleaned the rifle and put it back to sleep beneath stone and bark. She reset the traps that were meant to teach, not maim. She stood on the porch and looked out at the slope as stars pricked the sky. Silence returned, deeper now, earned. She poured herself fresh coffee and let it steam in the cold. If you're listening to this story and you felt the mountain close in around you, if you understand why some places demand respect and some people do not need to announce who they are, then you already know why these stories matter. For more powerful, realistic stories of strength, survival, and quiet justice, subscribe to the channel Her World's Stories. Your support keeps these voices alive and the silence meaningful.